Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott McGillivray, and this is the Real Estate Rebel podcast. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're looking for more information about real estate investing, go to scottmcgillivray.com. Anything and everything about real estate investing you need to know is there. Today's podcast is a little bit different. I am here on my own, but realistically, there's 10 of you with me as well. What I want to do is I want to start addressing some of the most frequently asked questions. If you are an aspiring real estate investor, if you own a few properties and you want to grow your portfolio, or even if you're a real estate guru and you have a huge portfolio, these are the top 10 questions that constantly and continuously come across my radar. I pulled all of these right off of the Real Estate Rebel Facebook group. So some of the answers are already up there, but I'm going to address all of them today and make sure that you guys know that there's lots of great questions about real estate investing. And if you have any questions, go to my Facebook group. Go to Scott McGillivray, everything Scott McGillivray on Facebook. You'll see my group, the Real Estate Rebel, and you can post your questions in there. So, and the big question, the one that comes up the most, the single most frequently asked question, it literally comes up more than probably the next 9 questions combined, has to do with where do I get the money, right? I'll read the question specifically, but I know that's what's being asked. I'll leave it to the end because it also has the biggest answer. But let's start with all the other questions that we have. So let's go with question number 10 is from Holly Johnson. Does it make good financial sense to purchase, renovate, and rent a property if you are not making a lot of profit each month? I'm thinking of the long game and as an investment for retirement while allowing someone else to pay down the mortgage. Thanks for any advice. So this is, when she's referring to does it make a lot of profit each month? Number one, you have to make sure that you are calculating profit properly, which is positive cash flow. I've done other podcasts about, the different ways to make money in real estate. But if you have a property where the amount of rent coming in is covering your cost of financing, your expenses, your property maintenance, your insurance, all those things, and at the end of each month, you have extra money, that's considered positive cash flow. So I'm going to say that's profit. If you have a property that is making profit, then yes, it is considered a good addition to your portfolio. That is the short answer. Why would you say no to a property that's making you money? Don't be picky. Don't be greedy. If something makes sense and makes money now, then do it. That's what I say. And if you find something later that makes more money or that's better, then you can ideally sell off the lesser performing assets or underperforming assets. Now, you've got the right idea here, Holly, which is that someone else is paying down the investment for you because principal recapture is also a portion of investing, meaning the rent coming in is covering the principal and interest payment on your mortgage, and the principal payment is paying down the asset. The rest of the rent should be covering the cost of financing. And while all this is happening, you also have market appreciation. So the property should be going up in value. So absolutely, don't sit around and wait for the better deal. Don't think I'm going to just keep going until I find the best one. If you find a property that typically you don't find the best cash flowing properties anyway, you make them, right? You create them by doing some sort of upgrade, some sort of renovation, adding value, converting it into a rental. But yes, if you can find a property that you can convert or make into a profitable rental, even if it's not a lot of profit, I say go for it. And then search for one that's better. And if you can have both, then great. All right, question number 9 is from Stephanie Shinkowski. Stephanie Shinkowski is asking, at which point did you move from managing properties on your own to a property management company? What do you consider when looking for one? Great question. At the beginning, I managed all my own properties myself. First of all, I'd go out and look for the properties. I would buy the properties. I would finance the properties. I'd post them for rent. I would show them to tenants. I would do all the leases and tenant applications. collected all the checks, took them to the bank, cut the grass, did the repairs, did the maintenance, did the upgrades, answered any questions, phone calls. I was just 24/7 on top of all my properties. Best thing I ever did, because I learned a million things. I learned how which things can break and the best ways to fix them, and how to be efficient. I used to drive around. I remember in the back of my car before I had my truck, I would always have a couple cans of paint. I would have this one color that I used on every property, right? Like McGillivray gray. And I could basically show up at any property at any time and do touch-ups. If there was scratches on the walls, I could just hit them, boom, boom, boom. If I'm there, I'm just cleaning it up, always making it look good. The other can of paint I had was a white semi-gloss, which was all my trim, all my doors, right? So anytime I was going to show a property, I would literally come in. I could do touch-ups for 20 minutes beforehand. Places look fresh, places look great. 2 cans of paint, one for trim, one for walls. I could do every property that I had because they were all the same color. Same thing went for flooring. I had the same flooring in all my properties. So you learn to be efficient. You learn to be consistent. You learn what costs too much to have someone else fix and what you can fix yourself. And I did this for many years. Probably the first 10 years of being a real estate investor, I managed all my own properties until it became too much work, until I became a full-time property manager. Basically, I had to have my own equipment. I was cutting grass, and I was weeding, and I was shoveling snow, and collecting garbage, and moving tenants in and out, and dealing with the turnover. It was a tremendous amount of work. When you get to hundreds and hundreds of tenants, all of a sudden it's out of control. But it helped me put a lot of processes in place, right? I have all the emails that I have all my checklists. Like, I have all these things that I created at the beginning that I use as templates. And those are things that are invaluable. And you know what? I should really have them available for you guys. Maybe I'll make that possible at scottmcgillivray.com. I'll find a way to get you guys access to some of those things. It got to the point after about 10 years where I realized I wasn't buying properties anymore. I was just managing the ones that I had. And I decided it was time to start bringing on property managers. And at that time as well, I had purchased a couple properties in the US, and that had forced me to onboard property managers. And I was really uncomfortable with it at first. And I was really nervous. But it didn't make sense for me to buy remote properties. I mean, the price points were so good and the cash flow was so great. I started buying these properties in the US, and I had to have, they were all over the place. I had to have property managers. And that kind of slow walked me into being comfortable having somebody else do the work. In fact, I ended up liking it more. Then I brought someone on to start managing portions of my portfolio, meaning, I hired a lawn maintenance company who started doing all the lawn maintenance, all the trimming of hedges, grass cutting, snow removal, all that. That was a huge weight off of my shoulders. The last thing I did was bring on a property manager to do the actual renting, tenant turnover, tenant management, collecting of the checks. With that came a tremendous amount of freedom, but you lose some profits. That's the trade-off. You have to give up a certain percentage of the rental income. And depending on what type of property it is, those percentages can change. So for instance, on a commercial property, like a large commercial property, you might pay a 4% management fee. If it's more of a residential multifamily property, maybe 12 units and less, you might be paying 6 to 8%, let's say, on a multi-unit. If it's like a fourplex or less, so single family homes, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, you're probably paying somewhere between 8 and 12% property management fee. That's of all the rental income coming in. If you're paying 12%, you better be 1,000% hands off. Like, you don't even want to know who's renting them. You don't even want to meet anybody. You don't want to know about the problems. You just want to see 88% of the gross rent coming straight into your account, and the other 12% goes to them. Now, short-term vacation rental properties and executive rentals, that's where property management fees can get really high, because those places are turning over sometimes every weekend or every week or every 2 weeks. I've seen fees from 15 up to 30% on those types of properties. Now, there's a tremendous amount of marketing that goes into those types of rentals, and a lot of work and cleanup and turnover. But listen, as long as, here's the key, as long as you are still profitable while paying a property manager, then it makes sense. If your margins are so tight that you can't afford to pay a property manager, you better be ready to do the work yourself. All right. Question number 8 is from Donna Gaddy. Donna Gaddy. Hi, Scott. I would love to hear your ideas about buying an underperforming property with existing tenants and how to rehab it in the most cost-effective way to increase ROI and cash flow. There's a lot of questions in there. An underperforming property, this is one of the things I typically don't suggest inheriting tenants if possible. So vacant possession, which doesn't completely safeguard you against the old tenants wanting the right to come back in after you do the renovation. However, for me, vacant possession, buying a property that has no lease on it is usually the best and in rough shape so I can fix it up and get new tenants in at a new rent rate. The challenge with renovating an existing property with current tenants in it is that even if you make the place 10 times better, you can only raise the rents by a very small percent. So you're better off with having a full turnover position. However, underperforming rental properties are a great opportunity because it usually becomes a situation with a motivated seller. If a landlord doesn't have the right training, if they have no documents or procedures on how they do things, typically and eventually they have a bad landlord and tenant relationship. And they look to sell the properties, and they won't disclose the fact that the renters maybe haven't paid in a few months or are way behind or, whatever the problem is. They're not going to disclose that. They want to sell the property. So you have to do your own due diligence. And ideally, vacant possession has been the key to me being able to purchase properties, fix them up, start fresh, making sure everybody knows that this is what I do. Now, it is the best way to increase your ROI is to fix up a distressed property. Buying a turnkey rental that is, fully fixed up, you're going to be paying a premium. And if you're inheriting tenants, then you can't increase the rents. So there's no motivation to do any major upgrades. You're basically just doing upkeep. So for me, it is about finding the underdog properties, finding the motivated sellers, finding the distressed properties, doing the work to upgrade them, charge premium rents because you're providing a premium place. And at the same time, you are gaining forced appreciation. You have increased the value of it so you can pull equity out ideally. That is the best way to do this. All right. Question number 7. Here we go. Question number 7 is coming in from Kyle Enns. And Kyle asks me, I would love to know more information on buying in the US as a Canadian. How does all that work? It's a great question. Good news about Canadians buying in America and Americans buying in Canada is that it's all possible. It's just when you're buying in a country where you're not a citizen, you're considered a foreign national. And as a foreign national, you have just slightly different tax implications of moving money across the border. All doable, all very profitable. I've done it many times, and the answer isn't completely straightforward. So I'm going to break it down for you so that you understand what box you fit in. So we'll use this version of how does a Canadian buy in the United States. It'll be very similar as a Canadian, an American buying in Canada. So first thing you need to do is determine what type of property are you buying, because that will determine what kind of structure you want to set up. And there's typically 4 types of scenarios. Scenario 1 is you're buying a property for personal use, meaning you want to buy a house in Florida. So let's take, for instance, I have a place in Florida that's for personal use. It is the ownership structure is such that it makes the most financial sense that I buy it personally in this situation because I'm not generating any income from it. I can't write off any expenses because there's no income coming in on it. And I want to keep everything pedestrian and residential and straightforward. So is the property for personal use? That's going to be one structure. Second structure is for a property that is going to be passed from generation to generation. So it's slightly different than the first one, which is you might buy a house and sell it a few years later. If you're going to buy it, keep it, and it's going to be inherited by your children, you're going to want to set up a different structure there so that your tax implications are reduced. Is it going to be a cash flowing rental property? Cash flowing rental property is about buying it, holding it, and generating rental income. So you need a certain structure which reduces any withholding taxes and allows you to move money, income across the border. So things get very different now. You're generating income. And then there's a fourth structure that is most appropriate for the quick turnover properties like flips or wholesales. Most of these scenarios, you will be buying a property in an LLC. An LLC is similar to a corporation in Canada, except for it's a lot cheaper to set one up. You can do it for about $100. So it's well worth it to have an LLC actually owning the property. And then you can either personally own the LLC, or I typically suggest a C Corp or S Corp owning the LLCs. So each property is its own LLC. All the properties are owned by a company, which can do cross-border transfers of profits and income. Wow, there's a lot there. Again, I should have started this with saying, you need to talk to an accountant who knows how to do this, a real estate accountant who allows you to set these structures up. It's not a huge financial investment to set up these structures, but it is critical to set them up properly. For liability issues, for tax implications. Withholding tax can really crush your profits if you don't have it set up properly. But there's a tremendous opportunity to do cross-border investing because, yes, there are some better opportunities in the United States for sure in terms of value, like discounts. Properties can be severely discounted like I've never seen anywhere else. The other thing which is great about cross-border investing is that you can have different forms of financing in each country, different amounts of equity in each country, and you can actually leverage your equity and your financing, and you can become a Forex trader, which is basically moving your debt or your financing back and forth and playing the exchange rate, something that has actually been just as profitable as real estate investing itself for me. Based on purchasing properties in the US and exchanging money when the dollar is favorable, and then moving not even money, just moving the financing back and forth. So you're basically pulling on a line of credit back and forth and gaining on the exchange rate. And you can usually make, about 5% a year extra on that if you do a really good job. I think I've been averaging about 6 or 7%, with a bulk of it coming in between 2008 and 2012. Some of those years were double-digit gains just on the exchange rate. All right, let me get to question number 6, which comes from Jenny Simmons Musso. Here's the question. We were just gearing up to commence investing in real estate and targeting student rentals, but with COVID, we're not sure if we should still delve into the market in the next 6 months. Perhaps we should invest in more of a real estate portfolio mix. Would love some direction at this time of uncertainty. It's a good question. I have a lot of student rental properties. That's where I started. And student rental properties have been very, very good to me. Now, in the last, in this short period of time of COVID that we've been in, there's definitely been some uncertainty with the student rental market. All of my student rental properties are still occupied. We did lose one set of tenants recently, and we had them replaced. So that wasn't a big deal. There was zero vacancy in between. And a lot of existing renters who didn't actually go off to school, they subletted their properties. So their leases are still in place. They're subletting. The rent is still coming in. I think it's really important to answer this question. It's really important not to be short-sighted. The situation we're in is temporary, and it's a temporary opportunity as far as I'm concerned, because there are people nervous, landlords with student rental properties, who think maybe I better sell really quickly. And maybe it's a good time to be buying student rental properties if you can get them at a discount, because you may have time to fix them up over the next 6 to 12 months. And by the time it's fixed up and ready to go, hopefully there'll be an end to this pandemic and everything. And there'll probably be actually what I would consider almost a double cohort, meaning all the people who decided not to go to school this year, lots of people probably held back. There's going to be a multiplier effect of not only the people graduating next year going off to university, but everyone who decided to wait as well. So it's probably going to be too many students going off to school, which is going to drive rents up. Now, this is a prediction of mine. This could be 2021. This could be 2022. We don't know for sure. I'm holding on to student rental properties because I love them. And I'll tell you what the secret to student rental success truly is. And I've learned this from not only COVID, but just having them for a long period of time. Student rental properties are basically residential homes in disguise. That's what they are, right? They typically have 1 or 2 units, and they have lots of students living in them, and they're paying substantial rents. But the truth is, they're usually single family homes. They're usually just residential homes disguised as student rentals for profitability. And right now, if I wanted to sell any of my student rental properties, what I would do if I had one come vacant, I'd probably go in, clean it up a little bit, and sell it as a single family home, because single family home prices are up. So I'm still going to make money on this thing. I don't need to sell it as a student rental. Once a property becomes a student rental, it doesn't have to be that forever. Most of mine were residential family homes. They still can be residential family homes, maybe with an income suite in the basement, even better. So don't think that student rental means a permanent change necessarily to a property. You are basically disguising a residential single family home as a student property in order to generate the extra rent that comes with renting to students. So really, what are you worried about? Best case scenario, you continue to rent it as a student rental. Worst case scenario right now, I, spend $5,000-$10,000 painting it, putting in some new floors, cleaning the place up, and selling it at a massive profit because houses are still up 18% year over year. That's my worst case scenario, is to make an 18% increase year over year. And my best case scenario is to keep it, use that equity to buy more properties and continue to cash flow. So I don't really see the downside, Jenny. Maybe this isn't a time to, when most people are scared of student rentals is probably the best time to get into them. That's usually the way it goes. All right, question number, I want to say 5, is from Viridiana Romero. I would love to hear about investing with other family members, families, holding trusts, etc. Okay, well, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is that when you invest with somebody, you're typically using a multiplier effect, like 1 + 1 = 10 when you invest in real estate. That's not to say that you can't do it alone. A lot of people invest on their own, but typically people who invest with somebody will buy more properties faster than somebody who is doing it alone. So I always suggest finding somebody to invest with in order to accelerate your success. So for instance, it may not be a family member. It might be your spouse. It might be your kid. It might be your brother or your sister, but it could also be a friend. It could be a coworker. It could be your real estate agent. There's so many different people. What's most important is that you are working with like-minded individuals. There's a lot of people in your life who are going to tell you that real estate investing is bad or starting your own business is too risky and yada, yada, yada. The truth is, most of those people will actually have no experience in real estate investing, no experience in business. And so they have no business giving you any advice on it. If you want real estate investing advice, speak to a qualified individual. Ask somebody who knows how to do it or who has done it, who has experience. Don't ask people who have no experience. If you listen to people who tell you what you can't do, they're going to end up being right, and that's a problem. So yes, I agree investing with somebody, but here is my next piece of advice to go with that. Make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that you have some sort of partnership agreement, even if you're just writing up like a shareholders agreement. Like, what is the ownership structure? Who puts in what money? Who approves repairs and maintenance? Like, who's in charge of renting it to the tenants? Who's got what responsibilities? And most importantly is what exit strategy do we agree on, right? What if one person wants to sell and the other person doesn't? Um, my business partners and I always had a situation where if one person wanted to sell, then we would both agree to sell. It was easier. Instead of one person buying out the other person, it was just, we always agreed, if either of us ever wants to sell, then we're all okay with it. Like, we just go with it. And that's worked out well. I've ended up having to sell several properties, none at a loss, which is great because my partners have decided they wanted to get out of it. I had one business partner where we had almost 40, well, we had more than 40 properties. We had 34 properties in the United States together and another 25 in Canada. Yeah, so we had lots of properties together. We have sold them all. We are not partners anymore on any of those investments, but we sold every single property because he wanted to get out of real estate. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll pull my profits out of here and I'll go buy other things. And it worked out extremely well. So definitely you want to talk about, how are we going to co-own this property? What's our exit strategy going to be? What can we agree to? What does our partnership look like? And then absolutely invest with somebody. You're going to buy more properties faster than if you do it alone. I don't know what number I'm on, but let's get to the next question here. This is from Adam Murray. In the case of an up-down duplex, what is the best way to go about sharing a garage, common outdoor living space? Does it make more sense to leave the outdoor backyard space for only the upstairs tenant or shared by both? Or will the property cash flow better if I rent the garage to a separate third tenant? Okay, great question. On multiplexes, when you've got more than one group living under one roof, which this is the majority of my properties, is multi-units, you need to be very clear, right? The Landlord and Tenancies Act, which governs most of my lease agreements, any landlord and tenant governing body will have a standard template of what a lease looks like between a landlord and tenant. Now, that's basically just says, that's just like sort of an all-encompassing overall, here's the rules. You can't, discriminate against anything here. You can't evict people like this. You need to give notice of this. That's fine. But there's I was going to swear, there is a ton of things that are not in there that are really important, right? Like, basically being specific about how certain circumstances work. And when you're in a multi-unit, you got to write these things out. And I'll give you some examples. I mean, the garage is just one of them, but who gets the use of the backyard? Who gets to park in the driveway? Which side of the driveway is for which tenant? Where is the garbage allowed to be? These are important, right? You have to make sure your tenants know that they can't leave the garbage on the front porch or on the back porch, and they can't leave it in the garage. I've had rental properties where, the tenants have left. I've opened the garage and there's literally like a year's worth of garbage in there. So you have to be specific about certain things, which you wouldn't necessarily think of unless you've been in my situation. So absolutely, 100% make a decision and charge more rent for it, depending on who gets allocations to what. If everyone can have some outdoor space, that's terrific, because here are the things that are going to cause issues between tenants living in the same place. The number one problem that you will have of renters living under the same roof is noise issues. So I usually start with like an 11 p.m. quiet clause. I'm like, after 11 p.m., everything goes down to like less than speaking voice, right? Whether it's the TV, the radio, whatever. Set a time and just say, guys, in this house, there is no need after 10 p.m. for anything to be louder than speaking voice. That's a huge game changer for people. In fact, more people are interested in renting when they know you have that clause. Like, we have a noise clause in here. No noise above speaking voice level after such and such a time. People love that. They're like, oh my gosh, my last house, at midnight, the tenant would watch these movies really loud, blah, blah, blah. The other thing is outdoor space. Who gets the deck? Who gets the patio? Who gets the backyard? Who gets the front yard? Which portions of those spaces are allocated to which tenants? And I'll tell you why that's important, because a lot of people want to have a barbecue. So make sure that every tenant has a designated barbecue space. Make sure that everyone has a designated garbage space. Make sure that everyone has somewhere they can put a bicycle. A lot of renters have bicycles, and you don't want them sitting chained to the front porch all the time. You want to make sure everyone's got a spot to put their bicycle. Parking. Who has the use of the garage? Which side of the driveway is for which tenant? And always, please, for the love of God, make sure they know they can't park on the grass. Believe it or not, it happens. They start parking on the grass, you get a bylaw infringement, you get trouble for that. And then storage. If there's somewhere for each tenant to have storage, that's great. But don't leave anything up to chance. Don't just rent the upstairs, rent the downstairs, and say, oh, whoever wants the garage, go ahead, because that will become a gong show, right? It needs to be very specific who gets use of which spaces. Now, if there's something that's slightly detached, now you brought up Adam brought up the idea of a garage. I have a bunch of properties that have detached garages, which I love. If a detached garage can be accessed without blocking the whole driveway, that is an opportunity to rent it out separately. I have rented these as storage units. I've got a guy that rented out about 4 or 5 garage spaces from me for his cars. This was a car guy. He loved his cars, but he lived in a condo. He only had one parking spot. He responded to an ad I had years ago about a storage unit. He's like, can I put a car? I'm like, of course you can. In fact, you can put 2. $100 a month. $100 a month per car, per garage. And he ended up renting a few garages from me. And so right there, extra income, extra cash flow. You got to be creative on these things, right? Even some of my larger properties that have lots of acreage, I've done outdoor storage, right? As long as it's not, looking like a disaster zone, people have things they want to park, trailers, boats, all kinds of things. If you've got some spots for outdoor storage, maybe that's an opportunity as well. All right, let me get to the next question here from Ann Voss. Can you talk about homeowners insurance? Not sure how things differ in Canada and the United States where I live, but do you need individual insurance policies for each property, or is it a better way to have an umbrella policy that covers multiple properties? What is the best policy to have for investment properties, landlord policies, blah, blah, blah? Thank you. Okay. Good question. Insurance is critical. You absolutely have to have insurance. That is not an option. It is a necessity. Now, yes, insurance works differently in different countries. And to be honest, it works different with different insurance companies. I've seen everything. I've seen brokers make terrible suggestions. I've seen them make lives incredibly easy. As a landlord, depending again, what type of building it is, typically, there are 2 types of insurance, residential and commercial, when it comes to your investing. Now, if something's about 4 to 6 units or more, you're going to be under a commercial policy. Commercial policy just makes more sense. Any of my buildings or commercial spaces, they have commercial policies. And that's pretty straightforward. You can shop those policies around to see who gives you the best rate. But for the most part, those are pretty standard. But on the 4 to 6 units or less, things are a little different. So where that gets divided up is, number 1, owner-occupied. Owner-occupied properties, most affordable, right? You should be getting a standard residential policy. If it's a single-family rental, then it should still be a residential policy. Some people, I've seen brokers try to sell investors on commercial policies for residential properties, and the rate is about double what it should be, which is ridiculous. However, as soon as a property becomes a rental, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 units, sometimes you can get away with 5 or 6. If it's owner occupied and 5 or 6, you probably get away with residential policy, which you would want because it's cheaper for the most part. Not necessarily the better coverage, but it's definitely cheaper. With those policies, you want to make sure that you have the right coverage. So you have to disclose that it's a rental. you may want to have some sort of renter insurance. You are going to want to have you're going to want to have certain damage insurance and loss of rent insurance on there. There's also, so because I've been doing this for so long, I work with a few specific insurance companies who have put together some really great policies for me. It's something that I've taught through my real estate training. People who are in my real estate uh, group, my network, have access to this. But basically, we've put together very affordable residential policies for rental properties that cover things that most policies don't, including loss of rent, sewer backup, also longer periods of vacancies, right? Like if my tenants are gone for 3 months, my policy isn't null and void. I have a lot of student rentals where sometimes in the summer the kids aren't there for a month or even two. And you need to make sure that you have a policy that covers you in a situation like that. That being said, once you do have multiple properties, and to get more specific with Anne's question, is do you have to have individual policies or can you have a blanket policy? And the answer is you can do both. And I do a hybrid. So each property has its individual insurance, which is like, if this place burns down, I have an insurance policy for it. However, I have a blanket liability insurance policy. So for every portfolio that I have, depending on, if it's under a personal or an LLC or a company, for every portfolio or grouping of houses, I'll have a liability policy that covers maybe a dozen or 24 of those properties. And that's in place for, if anybody was to sue you, you've got a good policy, one really rock solid policy that blankets over all of them in that portfolio. So that one policy is going to be twice as much as the others, but it's one policy being, $3,000 a year. Well, the rest of them are $1,500 a year is better than all of them being $2,500 a year. So it works out better. You need to talk to your insurance provider or your broker about setting you up with that, but it is the better way to go because you can get a really big liability piece in place to cover you. God forbid something terrible were to happen, but that's what insurance is. And then the real key here is not to be oversold on a commercial policy on a residential property. It's silly. I've seen people paying like $4,000 or $5,000 on a single family home when there's better policies for them at the $2,000 price point. So definitely want to be careful on this one. Insurance is a necessity, both in Canada and the United States. The US, I find, is more litigious, but you don't necessarily need to be oversold. I've heard about people spending tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, setting up really complicated structures in order to try to have a company in Alaska own a company in Delaware that goes across to Canada and that owns an LLC here. They're going to find you. If there's a problem, they're going to find you. So that's what insurance is for. You just own them under a financially savvy structure that makes sense for accounting and have the right insurance policy. That just makes sense. Okay, here we go. We're getting to the big one here. This is the big question. Definitely the most popular question. Everybody wants to know this. Where do I get the money to invest in real estate? And most specifically, I picked this question from Holly Johnson, but many people have asked something the same or similar. I need some advice on financing. How does private lending work? Does it work for flips and for renovations? Does it work on income properties? Is it worth looking into private lending, or are the banks the better way to go? Please help. Well. This is a great question because a lot of people struggle with the idea of investing in real estate because they think they need to come up with the money, which is false. The best thing about real estate investing is that for the most part, you're using other people's money. We all know that you're going to want to finance at least 80% loan to value. So 80% of the money is going to be financed in some way, shape, or form. And you want to go for the most affordable form of financing. That's typically with a conventional lender like a bank. So you talk to your mortgage advisor and you say, hey, what are the best possible rates for me on this property? We all know this process. This is not new information, but I want to put this in perspective for you, because this question, which is the most frequently asked question, is being asked incorrectly. Imagine this. Imagine you walked into the bank tomorrow and you're like, hey, I want to invest in real estate. I need $400,000. What do you think the answer is going to be? Probably no, because who in their right mind is going to hand over $400,000 for some mystery idea? It becomes a lot easier for them to give you $400,000 if you walk in with a listing and an offer, an accepted offer, and you're like, here's the property, here's the plan. Then they start the process, which means you actually need to identify the opportunity before you identify where the money's coming from. And that makes sense as a homeowner just as much as it makes sense as a real estate investor. Don't go asking people for money. Show people what you're planning on doing. If you're buying a home, go in there with a plan. Here's the home. Here's my income. It's for personal. That all makes sense. If you want to be a real estate investor, go out and learn how to buy the properties first. And you need to be able to pitch that it's a good investment opportunity, because nobody wants to give money to somebody who's looking for money, because that typically means they're not good at having it. What people will be interested in is giving money to people who have an opportunity to make them a return. And understanding how to provide people with a profitable return is how money finds you. That is the secret, the caramel secret to being able to scale a business in real estate, is to be able to make your investors money as well. Because if you can make your investors money and you can make yourself money, you don't need any of your own money. This is where JV partners come into play. This is where unconventional forms of financing come into play. I personally fully finance all my deals. If I'm going to buy a $500,000 property, I use $500,000 of financing. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the way to do it. Once you get good at this, once you scale, you're going to use leverage in your portfolio to fully outright purchase properties. No mortgages, no approvals, no credit checks, no CMHC, none of this stuff that is very prohibitive as a real estate investor. No 20% down, just 100% finance, and then 100% finance any renovations. And then when it's done, I'll transfer the equity in that property back into the financing portfolio, and I'll actually have access to more leverage. Again, I will have to do an entire podcast about this because it is so much to explain. But the key to getting money to invest in real estate is to find the right opportunities, which is cash flowing properties. You need to be able to show somebody, hey, here's a property. I'm going to convert it to 3 units. It's currently 2 units. I'm going to rent it for this, this, and this. It needs this much of a renovation. This is the purchase price. Here's how much it cash flows at the end of the day. And therefore, if you would lend me $100,000 to use as a down payment, I could give you a 10% return for the next 2 to 3 years, whatever your terms are. And now this person can actually see on paper, oh, I see where the money's coming from. I see 10%. This is what you might offer to a private investor, because they're giving you the money that's in second place typically. So then you can go to the bank, you can get the other 80% you need. You've got the 10% from your private or the 20% from your private investor. You have fully financed the deal. And when you blend the rates, they're not that bad, because at the bank, you might be able to get 1.5% right now, which is phenomenal. And that's 80% of your money is at 1.5% interest. 20% of your money is at 10% interest. When you put them all together, your overall effective interest rate is probably 3.5%, which still ain't bad. You can probably cover a 3.5% interest rate on a good investment property. That is where the money comes from. It comes from everybody else. And it can come from a partner. So you can partner on the property and give up equity, and then your financing becomes cheap. You can have a JV partner who's like a joint venture partner who only comes in as a financer or on equity. And JV partners can do private lending anywhere from 4%. I've seen up to 12%, depending on what type of property it is, how short the terms are, blah, blah, blah. Then you have your conventional lending, which is phenomenal. That's your mortgage, right? Let's start with a mortgage. You go to the bank, you get yourself a mortgage. You're going to use mortgages when you start, but you're going to use less and less of them as you build up a bigger portfolio, because they're not as effective for your seventh, eighth, and ninth property, for instance. That's when you're going to start getting into BAs and lines of credit and secured and unsecured lines of credit and equity finance. There's so many different ways to finance real estate. I think people get caught up. They think, oh, I need the money first, and then I go and get the property. That is not how this works. You need to go out and find the property, and then you need to show somebody how they can get a return on your investment property. And there are a lot of people. There are just as many people out there. I promise you, there are just as many, if not more people out there that have lots of money and don't know what to do with it, as there are people who don't have enough money and want to find something to do. So it really makes sense in this world of real estate investing for people to come together and leverage each other, right? If you aren't the money person, you need to be the pro. You need to be the one who knows how to find the properties, knows how to rent them out, knows how to fix them up. And maybe you're the real estate agent. Maybe you're the contractor, the designer. Maybe you're a broker. I don't know. Whatever your specialty is, make sure you've got a skill that brings value to the table. And then finding the money is the easy part. There's so much money out there. It's embarrassing. It's about presenting opportunities that show people that there's a good return. I hope that answers the question properly for Holly and for everyone else who's looking for the money. Stop looking for the money, look for the opportunities, learn what it means to be a real estate investor, and start finding those properties so you can present them to potential investors, right? Though they aren't the pros, they know how to get a return, right? And they're looking for people like you to show them where to put their money. All right. Blowing my mind. If you've got any more questions, I'm going to be doing this again. Go to my Facebook group, The Real Estate Rebel, and everything with real estate investing. I've got 2 groups actually on Facebook. You can pump your questions right into the Facebook group, and people will start answering in your comments right away. I will answer either in your comments as well, or I'll bring them right on my show here, like I just did. Went through 10 questions there. Lots of stuff about real estate investing, and I absolutely love it. So thank you, everybody who sent in a question. I really, really appreciate it. If you've got anything else you want to know about real estate investing, you need to get trained, go to my website, scottmcgillivray.com. Everything about real estate is there. Or you can always stop by the Real Estate Rebel Facebook group, which I just told you about. We've got some great conversations going on there. Make sure that you guys like, follow, and subscribe this podcast. That way we can make more of them for you. Hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time. I'm Scott McGillivray, and this is The Real Estate Rebel.